very good evening. Namaste and welcome to Citti Media. My name is Citti and welcome again for another round of Vaishali Dialogue, a panel discussion where we'll be discussing a whole range of topics ranging from politics to foreign affairs. And if you've noticed one thing about Citti Media, it's that we have tried to focus on security issues and foreign policy issues that are generally not covered by the mainstream media. And Northeast is one of those regions which has a big security imperative across India. And this region has been ignored by the mainstream media for a very long time. And we are investing a very conscious effort in order to do the right thing. Joining us today to discuss about the current security situation in the Northeast are very eminent panelists, starting with Mr. Gopal Krishna Pillai, a former Home Secretary and Commerce Secretary, and he was also serving as the Joint Secretary for Northeast Affairs. Mr. Jaideep Saikia is a very well-known conflict analyst based in Guwahati, and he's also a very popular face on television debates. And finally, Dr. Ankita Dutta, who is a regular face on our channel and needs no introduction, and her research on the Northeast has been very well known. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. First of all, namaste to all of you. I hope all of you have been good.
Namaste.
Yeah, good. Welcome.
Namaste. Fine.
Welcome,
Thank
Ankita. Meeting you the first time.
Yeah.
Right. It's an honor and a privilege to have all of you here. And it's definitely a very interesting topic to discuss. And I'll begin with you, Mr. Pillai. The recent attack on the Assam rifles by the PLA and MNPF shattered the lull that the Northeast has been experiencing for a while now. What, according to you, are the reasons for this sudden belligerence?
To tell you very frankly, I think one really doesn't know at the moment. It's still a fluid situation. All I can tell you is from my knowledge, this was an area which was under the control of the ZRA earlier. But in recent years, the ZRA has moved out. And obviously the PLA and the others have come into this area to dominate the situation. I can only think that the reason could be purely tactical, in the sense that in recent years, there have been reports from the local communities itself that there has been large-scale drug smuggling. Both local villagers as well as others are involved in this. And if by any chance, I'm not sure because the Assam Rifles have not yet come out with any facts about their attempts to curb drug smuggling, and whether that has affected the interests of both locals as well as the PLA, the militant groups. And therefore, this is a reaction to a local action by the Assam Rifles. I can only think so, because otherwise I don't really see any reason why the PLA should take up this sort of violence, knowing that this would mean that there would be a severe reaction from the state and the central forces.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that, Mr. Saikia. I think Mr. Pillai brings up a very important point. And do you think that in any way that the Chinese have re-entered the Northeast insurgency? Because it was going downhill for a while now, for the last 5 to 7 years, like if we were to bring out the statistics, but suddenly there seems to be a surge again.
Yes, I definitely think that they have re-entered the Northeast insurgency game, and this time rather decisively. To sort of hark back to the past, they had stopped aiding the Northeast insurgents during the time of Tang Xiaoping for a while. But this time around, the aid to the insurgent group, which I would say is aid plus, because of a number of reasons. Let me enumerate. First of all, earlier they were just giving training, small arms, and safe havens in places like Yunnan. But this time, according to my analysis, let's take the recent ambush in Churachandpur that you just referred to, or even the 6th Dogra attack in Chandel of Manipur in 2015. Both these attacks, I think, were actually planned by the Chinese Ministry of State Security alongside the valley-based insurgent groups, which comprises the groups like the PLO of Manipur as well. So the entire atmospherics have changed. Now they're, I think, perhaps post Galwan or post the sort of atmosphere which sort of permeates both the countries. I think they are taking a direct sort of a stance as far as the insurgency game is concerned. And Eastern Ladakh and Northeast are two different terrains altogether. And that is why they are using the insurgent groups in a very, very different way here. As I said earlier, they were using them by way of giving them help in training and arms, and safe haven. But this time, according to reports which I have received, and my own analysis tells me that the Ministry of State Security is actually planning attacks alongside groups like the PLA Manipur. And there are very important leaders in some of these insurgent groups like Manohar Mayum, who is the commander-in-chief of the PLA Manipur. He's very, very close to the Chinese intelligence agency, Ministry of State Security. And you see the atmosphere is also conducive because of what happened in Myanmar, for instance, after the 1st February 2021 military takeover. So now they have a very available launch pad or a staging area, so to say. So all these factors, I think, actually have coalesced, and there is certainly a decisive entry of the Chinese, and for a number of reasons. They want to pin down the Indian security forces, including the Indian Army, to CICT duties away from their primary duties in the northern borders on the border management posture, as also naturally foment trouble in an area which is already experiencing unrest of sorts. So I think, yes, you're right, that the Chinese entry is pretty much sure.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. And Dr. Ankita, you've been researching on the history of the Northeast for a while now. So insurgency also happens to be a big part of the interest of your research. Now, for our viewers who may not be aware in detail as to how the insurgency actually began, could you summarize the history of it, especially after the Indian independence? Why did it begin so soon?
First of all, thank you, Sharanji, for inviting me today with such eminent co-panelists. It is my pleasure to be here today. And Jaideep Saikia and GK Pillai sir, both of them, they have already spoken about the international dimensions of the recent ambush that took place in Manipur. So coming to your specific question on the history of insurgency in Northeast, or what I would say Purvuttar Bharat, and when it all began, especially after the post-independence era. So I think, leaving aside all benchmarks of what I would say political correctness, we need to understand terrorism in Purvuttar Bharat, because it cannot be delinked. It is something which cannot be delinked from the decline of Sanatan belief systems and the subsequent rise of Christianity. It has not only weakened from within entire societies, their cultures and civilizations, leading to the destruction of different ways of lives and belief systems of the people, but also paves the way for the rise of separatist movements by first psychologically distancing and then separating the people away from their own kinsmen and then the entire country. So the most pertinent questions that arise here are, who is actually the real enemy who is inflicting deaths on the brave heroes of our country? who are the forces responsible for fanning insurgency every time in Purvottar Bharat? And will Bharat be ever able to defeat these forces inimical to her security and the safety of her citizens? I mean, Bharatiya Itihas, since you are talking about history, Bharatiya Itihas would forever remain incomplete without Purvottar Bharat. The Mahabharata is replete with several references to Raja Bhagdat of Pragjyotishpur and his elephant Supratik, who fought on the side of the Kauravas in the Kurukshetra war. The Kalika Puran, the Yogini Tantra, they all contain several descriptions about this region as one of the major centers of Tantric Shakta Parampara. But what were the real factors that led to several states in Purvottar Bharat to resort to a path of armed rebellion against the Indian state? I mean, just a few years after India's independence. In this context, can we really deny the linkage between the rapid growth of Christianity and the subsequent decline of dharmic faiths? Because immediately after independence, special constitutional provisions were enacted for these states in the name of protecting their unique tribal culture. And the reasons behind the introduction of the inner line permit or the ILP system here, it cannot be separated from the context of the rapid growth and proliferation of the church. Nehru's stepmotherly attitude towards this region and the suspicious activities of the British missionary Verrier Elwin, who was appointed by Nehru as the anthropological advisor to NEFA. NEFA, that was Northeast Frontier Agency, and which is present-day Arunachal Pradesh. This was to a large extent actually responsible for the rise of insurgent movements in the Northeast, fed by a well-nourished network of drug cartels. An agreement was reached in the beginning of the 1960s between Nehru and Verrier Elwin, which formally banned the entry of sadhus or Hindu dharma gurus into the state of Nagaland at first, and then to the rest of the hill states. Nehru, I would say, he had an unexplained fascination actually for Verrier Elwin, and Elwin's exclusive preservationist policy eventually led to the Christianization of entire Purvottar Bharat. The decline of dharmic faiths was marked by the beginning of various inter and intra-community hostilities and the subsequent rise of secessionist movements. And very soon, this enchantingly beautiful part of the country, it came to be identified with a toxic combine of drugs and guns that soon became entangled with the church. Thanks to the legacy of Nehru, much of our energies and attention remain focused on Islamic jihad in Kashmir in the immediate aftermath of the partition. I mean, by saying this, I'm not at all downplaying the Kashmir question in the larger context of the country's national security, which has also equally been about saving the Hindu civilizational heritage of Kashmir and the land of Rishi Kashyap. But in the meanwhile, the pot kept boiling in Northeast, unknown and unheard to many in the rest of the country. And this war was going to prove too lethal and deadly to be tackled by the Indian state in the years to come. And the argument that we have been continuously fed is that Northeast India is a land of ethnic heterogeneity, and increasing polarization along ethnic lines has been chiefly responsible for the rise of insurgent movements and other conflicts here. But is this really the truth, or just another sugar-coated narrative of the leftist academia to divert our attention away from the real problem? I mean, are the conflicts among the various Vanavasi communities residing here, are they real, or have they been manufactured? So this also brings us to the tangled web of the illegal narcotics trade, which continues to be one of the major reasons behind the nagging problem of insurgency in Purvottar Bharat, because drug trafficking is still one of the major sources of funding for these insurgent groups that are active here. And obviously an adverse consequence of this has been the increasing spread of HIV/AIDS in nearly all the states of this region. And in order to oppose and fight the Indian state and the government, the insurgents needed weapons. Initially, they used to procure these weapons by snatching personal arms from ill-trained and complacent police and village guards. But very soon they became better organized, and then they began to raid isolated police outposts, often, of course, in connivance with corrupt policemen and administrative officers. Now, this problem, the struggle then intensified, and the insurgents required more sophisticated weapons in order to pose a challenge to the state machinery. And this was when they needed huge amounts of cash, and quite predictably, illicit trade in drugs or narcotics eventually emerged as one of the best sources to raise funds as and when they required. So we need to remember here that in the past, actually, Northeast had never been a producer of narcotics, and whatever little was produced was meant for local consumption only. Illegal trafficking of banned drugs and narcotics and the rise of insurgency is a phenomenon that began here in the post-independence era, as you have said.
Thank you so much for sharing that civilizational perspective on how the Northeast was integrated with mainland India. And Mr. Pillai, I come to you with this question. I mean, you know the Northeast very well. You've been in charge of the affairs over there. Especially with the Modi government taking charge in 2014 and coming out with the policy of Act East, how much do you think the Northeast has witnessed changes in terms of its infrastructure, in terms of its policy growth as far as this region is concerned?
Well, there's definitely been improvement in the infrastructure in terms of the roads and the bridges and so on. But it's not something which started, I'm one of those who are very highly critical of the statement that everything started only after Modi.
Yeah.
There's nothing, I think it does a disservice not only to the, decades of development which took place earlier. You can always say that things you could have spent more money. But you must recollect that it was also the UPA government which brought in that the Northeast Ministry, the 10% non-lapsable pool for funding. Many of the infrastructure is also already there. And the Modi government has built upon that. And it is rightly so. The attention has come to these areas more than in the past. And that is correct, because these are areas which are both strategically important, as well as from the communication point of view, they have been lagging behind.
Right.
So that is important. But I think while a little bit of the infrastructure problem has actually been taken away by the fact that now digital communication has become so common that somebody even in the most remotest part of Nagaland can communicate, provided you have the network system to be able to communicate with the rest of India. And we've seen that happen with entrepreneurs and so on, who are now setting up online businesses and selling their products from remote corners of the Northeast to different parts of the world. So that is possible. One aspect which I think is so far neither the earlier governments nor the current government has been able to tackle is actually the lack of governance. The lack of governance plagues most of the states in the Northeast, which is why corruption is high. Most of the money doesn't go to the people, to the development, and that is an area which I think really requires a tremendous amount of attention, because without that, the Act East policy becomes limited unless you have the economic development within the Northeast itself.
Right. And in terms of the security concerns that face the Northeast today, what, according to you, are the top issues that the government should probably take cognizance of?
Well, see, if you look at the top three concerns, one, I think the concern will be of what I call as illegal migration. Illegal migration from Bangladesh, illegal migration from Myanmar, and to an extent, certain elements of migration which will come from the Chinese side also.
Okay.
So illegal migration is going to be one major security situation which will have to be managed. And with climate change, as well as the difficult situation in which Myanmar is today, you will find much more Myanmaris coming over into the Northeast, trying to flee the Myanmarese military. There's almost a full-fledged civil war out there, and that impact is going to be felt in the Northeast also.
Right.
The second aspect I look at, I think, is going to be because of the current developments is actually the Chinese intrusions into Arunachal Pradesh. That will create a lot of serious security situations.
Right.
They have the terrain advantage, but you can expect from the Chinese far more piecemeal intrusions into different remote corners of Arunachal Pradesh, and that will create problems for us unless we take. I believe that the Arunachal Scouts, that force maybe need to be literally, quadrupled or 10 times that number to be able to focus on what I call as the protecting the border from Chinese intrusions.
So
the third issue, which I'll finish with this, is actually the unresolved issue of the Nagas. I think so long as that issue remains unresolved, you don't really will get peace in the Northeast, because that was the mother of all insurgencies from which others have got and therefore the government needs to focus its political capital more into trying to resolve the Naga issue.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. You bring up very important points. And if I may ask you a small follow-up, especially about what you said about Arunachal Pradesh. Now, of course, it's come to public knowledge, and it's been a huge security concern for India. And China and the Chinese have been conveniently, putting up their act of salami slicing and taking away small portions of our border at Arunachal Pradesh. Unfortunately, this is not being discussed enough. And while you call for a quadrupling of the Arunachal Scouts, do you foresee that there will be a heavy militarization of Arunachal Pradesh, just how we had in Kashmir probably in the early 2000s?
See, the militarization is already taking place. You have two basic core commanders, 2 units have been set up in the Northeast. Therefore, that for the threat against the Chinese, which is well planned, and we need to be take care of that. So, what I'm really worried about is this is not something which it's been happening slowly in the past, because of both sides are far away from what they perceive as their boundaries.
Right.
The Chinese have been slightly quicker than India in reaching up to what they perceive as their line of the international boundary. And therefore, to that extent, in the last 10-15 years, India has also built up the infrastructure to reach our perceived international boundary. Quite a large effort. The entire BRO, if you remember, almost 15 years ago, was diverted from internal road building in the Northeast and diverted to the border. So that work is going on. And I believe that, I think partly as a result of that, the Chinese, having seen that, they're also accelerated their development towards the border. And we are seeing that happen. And it's inevitable. Your border, your final, and I mentioned this earlier on other programs also, our real boundary is going to come when both the forces meet face to face. Till you meet face to face, you can't we all know possession is 9/10 ownership. So if you possess the land, you own that land. So whatever you may say. So both sides are actually moving as quickly as they can. A little more difficult for us because of the terrain. But as and when both the forces come to face, that will be the line of actual control, because we've never had those boundaries, physical possession permanently.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, Mr. Saikia, you have been addressing this term called strategic encirclement of the Northeast, and it's a very big concern. And of course, like what Mr. Pillai also said, I think cartography plays a very important role, because the Chinese come up with their own maps now and then and claim certain territories to themselves. But speaking in the sense of what current threats Northeast actually faces, how would you summarize the security situation, especially talking about the term of strategic encirclement?
Yes, Sharanji, I think Mr. Pillai is very right. I think we have to be very cautious about the Chinese move, particularly what you yourself have termed as salami slicing. And despite the fact that there are disputed borders and we have not had the sort of transgression in the eastern sector all of which I have traversed on foot throughout the eastern sector, the way it happened in Galwan, for instance. But the fact of the matter is there are various areas, particularly in the Wolong sector. I'm referring to technically what is known as the fishtail 1 and fishtail 2 areas, which are, for some reason or the other, which I don't want to go into now, there was a little bit of faux pas from our side as well. And where, the maps were sort of, inadvertently sort of handed over as theirs. So it continues to be that. So I see now that there is a belligerent dragon sort of, spewing fire and brimstone. You could expect more intrusions and more transgressions in the eastern sector as well. But as I said in my earlier answer, I think their first probe is to actually activate the Northeast insurgents, which they're doing, and they have done it, and we have seen it recently as well in the case of the Chura Chapun attack. Right. You are referring to the strategic encirclement, which I have been writing and speaking about for almost 2 decades now. You see, Northeast is perhaps one of the only area or region in the entire South Asia to be so strategically encircled. 5 countries, you see, and out of which I think almost 3 or 4 of them are quite inimical. We have already spoken of China, Myanmar after the 1st February 2021, and I think, there is a bit of a ambivalent stance as far as New Delhi is concerned as to New Delhi doesn't yet have a clear-cut policy on Myanmar as to how it will sort of, do business with the Tatmadaw, which as far as I'm concerned is going to be there for quite some time. And then you have Bangladesh. Mr. Pillai has very rightfully referred to the illegal migration. That problem continues to fester. And then you have, I still remember when I went to Bangladesh in 2016 for a track 2, Gohar Rizvi, for instance, the internal affairs advisor to Sheikh Hasina told me that, Jaideep, we need to sort of, because, Bangladesh is facing a different sort of problem altogether because they don't have real opposition inside the Jatiya সংসদ, inside their parliament. And as I was saying, Professor Gohar Rizvi himself told me that, Jaideep, we need to create an opposition. Now, why am I saying this? Or why did he say this? Because there is a real fear that China and other inimical forces like Pakistan, who are anti-India, could use the erstwhile East Pakistan, Bangladesh now, despite the fact that we have an ally and a friend in Sheikh Hasina's dispensation against us. As a matter of fact, I would go so far to say that there are actually in reality 2 Bangladeshis. One which is naturally a pro-liberationist, which is devoted to the Bengali nationalism. But the other one, which identifies itself with the global Salafi movement, the transformative moment which Islam is passing through, which is also very rapidly anti-India. And that would be used as a staging ground, but both by the ISI of Pakistan, the deep states of Pakistan and China, to as a staging ground for Northeast. And to sort of sum up, recently we've had Bhutan, which is the only friendly country in the neighborhood. And I had a good fortune of being there and meeting His Majesty as well, and confirming with everything which we can cooperate on in 2013. But they're also getting closer to China by way of a MOU, as far as the border is concerned. The 3, step talks which they have just concluded just about a week ago. So, we need to understand the Northeast as a region which is not only strategically encircled, but which is imperiled in a lot of ways. And I think it'll do well for New Delhi to take cognizance of this very interesting aspect that we are going to face in the future. And that is why I had actually presented a blueprint way back in 2009, before the BJP government really took over. It was actually to the BJP government that I, in waiting, dispensation in waiting, if I can use a term, a blueprint about the Northeast Security Council. Because we have seen that the Northeast Council and the donor ministry itself have not been able to sort of, really work out or unveil a comprehensive policy for the Northeast. And that is why I think we need a different apparatus. I'm sure a lot of people will not agree with me because they'd say, just, you are just simply making a different apparatus altogether. But in the ambit of the Northeast Security Council, I thought of actually aspects like, from drug running to border management, whole gamut. If you wish, the blueprint is with me, which I actually handed over to, I don't mind saying so, to Mr. Advani when he was the prime ministerial candidate. But the fact of the matter is, these sort of things, like what we've experienced in Manipur, the Chinese intrusion, the non-resolution of peace processes, which Mr. Pillai alluded to. You see, we have had, almost 24 years now with the Naga peace talks going on. We have had suddenly outrageous change of both governor and interlocutor in Mr. R. N. Ravi. And the framework agreement, which was tom-tommed as a very historic agreement. So these things have actually not gone unnoticed by the populace of Northeast, as also by, of course, the insurgent groups and the enemical forces. So it seems to people, observers of Northeast, and I'm a student of Northeast security, and it seems as if, we need to have a comprehensive policy, which is well cobbled out. And that is why one had put forward this concept of Northeast Security Council. And I think a little bit of celebration needs to go into that.
Right. Points very well noted, sir. But I do have a small follow-up on what you had to say about the Bhutanese getting closer to the Chinese. I mean, if the Chinese are not holding any water as far as the agreements between India and China are concerned, then why should the Bhutanese actually be very confident about an MOU which is not even legally binding be signed with the Chinese? I mean, can the Chinese be actually trusted? Because especially since Bhutan is so heavily dependent on the security from India.
No, you're quite right. All I'm trying to voice is the apprehension that the Chinese are trying to sort of, when you look at the geography of Bhutan itself, you see, they're trying to sort of, in the last year, we saw, in 2018, we saw Doklam, you see. Doklam itself was not a very important issue as far as I'm concerned. Okay. Their intention or objective, the Chinese intention, was to reach the Jampheri Ridge so as to be able to sort of, breathe down on our Siliguri corridor, which is the tenuous 22-kilometer link with the rest of India, and perhaps threaten it in the way of severing it, actually. But the more important question is that they want to expand or widen the Chumbi Valley of Bhutan, you see, for exactly the same reason, because the other aspects like Sikkim and, as I said, Siliguri corridor also comes into play. Now, I'm not saying for a moment that Bhutan is playing into the hands of the Chinese. What I'm trying to say is Chinese are trying to sort of, there has been talk about a string of pearls, etc. And Northeast is something which is being handed over in a platter to them by way of, the strategic encirclement I'm talking about. Till yesterday, we were not very certain as to what game they were playing with Bhutan, but now we saw a MOU being signed. Right. And you're quite right. I'm not saying that Thimphu, by any stretch of imagination, is going to sort of, leave our hand. But the fact of the matter is, my job as a student of security or as a security conflict analyst is to forewarn the dispensation in New Delhi that, things are not very, hunky-dory as far as these things are concerned. Right. And we in the Northeast are right in the middle of it. And that is precisely why, is forewarned is forearmed. That's how I put it, actually.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. Dr. Ankita, just continuing from where you left off, you brought in this very historical and a civilizational perspective on what was exactly happening in the Northeast. Now, if we were to connect that and bridge it with what attacks have taken place very recently, whether it was the Manipuri ambush or the Assam-Mizoram border row. How do you see these incidents, and what do you attribute these incidents to? Because I've spoken to at least 3 or 4 different experts, security experts from the Northeast, and all of them do seem to have a slightly different perspective on why exactly the Assam-Mizoram border seem to happen.
Yes, true. I think GK Pillai sir had said something about lack of governance in the Northeast. So, Jaideep Saikia sir had elaborated on that. So while answering this question about the Assam-Mizoram border road that happened just a few months back and the recent Manipur ambush, first of all, briefly, I would like to talk about the Khuga Battalion of the Assam Rifles, which was being headed by the Colonel Viplav Tripathi, who was killed along with his family. The Colonel, he was serving as the CO or the commanding officer of the Khuga Battalion of the Assam Rifles. And he was earlier serving in Mizoram until the transfer of his battalion for a 4-month stint to Manipur. This was in July 2021. And around the same time when the Assam-Mizoram border dispute took place, he was transferred to Manipur. Now, during his tenure in Aizawl, Colonel Tripathi was a very popular face among the local people for many of his goodwill gestures, and most importantly, the crusade that he had been leading against cross-border smuggling of both drugs and arms. 46 Assam Rifles under Colonel Tripathi, it was very, very instrumental in thwarting drugs and weapon smuggling from Myanmar, and the smuggling of Yaba tablets amounting to crores of rupees from Mizoram to Nilam Bazar in Assam via Manipur has almost become a regular affair along these border areas. Because Yaba tablets, they are easy to smuggle and they are also difficult to trace. It was under Viplav Tripathi's able leadership that the Khuga Battalion of the Assam Rifles had been at the forefront in both border management and thwarting all attempts of illegal smuggling through Myanmar and Manipur into Mizoram and then into Karimganj in Assam's Barak Valley in southern Assam. It was also able to recover various weapons and warlike stores which could have landed in the hands of powerful criminal networks of drug lords and insurgents. So in this context, we also need to understand the link of Assam's Karimganj district with the drug network that is spread across Myanmar and Mizoram via Manipur. This needs to be explored further. I'll explain this briefly. So, an all-out war has been launched by the Assam police on drug mafias and drug peddlers, but they still continue to find a leeway to smuggle in drugs and contraband goods through the Myanmar-Mizoram route, dodging past security checkposts in order to make an entry in Karimganj district of southern Assam. And the drive against such clandestine business of narcotics, it began in January 2021 under Colonel Viplav Tripathi's leadership in Mizoram while he was posted in Mizoram. It was later, with the coming to power of Assam Chief Minister Dr. Himanta Biswa Sharma, that a manhunt was started by the police against drug dealers in Assam having links with notorious criminals and smugglers from across the border. And both Manipur and Assam, they are currently at the forefront of the war against drugs and illegal narcotics. The smugglers also, they have begun adopting various new methods to hoodwink the law enforcement agencies, not just to smuggle banned drugs in and outside, but also the cough syrup, fencidal, Burmese betel nuts, cattle, and rhino horns. It is said that Colonel Tripathi, he bonded very closely with the local people of Mizoram through his remarkable endeavors for their safety and well-being, especially for the drug crusade that he was leading. His battalion conducted an anti-drug campaign, which was named in the Mizo language as Ruilo Do, that is a war against drugs, Ruilo Do. This was the name of the campaign. And this campaign was conducted in several border areas of Mizoram, beginning from January 2021, as I said. In February 2021, Manipur Chief Minister N. Biren Singh had declared a war on the smuggling and trade of drugs. And this campaign has been exceedingly well received by the common people of Manipur, even those residing in the far-flung hilly and remote areas. And since then, the government of Manipur has been undertaking various commendable measures to prevent cross-border trafficking of narcotics and large-scale opium cultivation in the state. Many farmers in Manipur, they cultivate poppy precisely because it is profitable. There is a remote village named Peh. It is in the Ukhrul district of Manipur that borders Myanmar on the east. And this particular village has stood out as one of the finest examples in this entire exercise of the fight against drugs, because its residents began destroying illegal poppy cultivations which were planted on a large scale within the jurisdiction of the village. Colonel Viplav Tripathi himself had busted several drug trafficking cases along the Indo-Myanmar border, and he was also working for the rehabilitation of insurgent groups into the mainstream. His battalion had received several laurels and praise from the locals. In fact, a leader of the Young Mizo Association, it is an organization that works closely with law enforcement agencies in Aizawl in fighting the drug menace. That leader, he said, as it was reported in a local daily of Assam, that Colonel Tripathi was a very good friend of the Mizos, and his enthusiasm about tackling the menace of drug trafficking and arms smuggling was indeed remarkable. And he has done commendable jobs during his tenure in Mizoram. This was the statement of the leader of the YMA, Young Mizo Association. Now, after Colonel Tripathi moved to Manipur after his transfer, he also invited the leaders of the Manipur unit of the Young Mizo Association for a tea party. And while during his stint in Manipur, he had busted several drug rackets. And in one such daring mission that took place on the 27th of July, 2021, and interestingly, this mission happened around the same time when the Assam-Mizoram border dispute erupted. In this mission, Colonel Tripathi and his team, they had seized 377 grams of heroin along with a large quantity of weapons, and he was directly supervising the anti-drugs operation in the area, which is a well-known hotspot for drug smuggling, as Jaideep Saikia has also pointed it out. And as mentioned earlier, the place where Colonel Tripathi was posted and where the ambush took place is very close to the borders with Myanmar. It has a history of several such attacks on military convoys in the past as well. And shortly after his death, the Assam Rifles published a statement where it specifically stated that Colonel Tripathi's goodwill for the society will last an eternity. So I think connecting these dots, when we connect these dots, quite convincingly, it leads us to the conclusion that his killing, maybe it wasn't an ordinary killing. It was perhaps a very, very well-planned revenge killing by the insurgent groups who were maybe looking for an opportune moment to target the commanding officer's unit. And these are, I think, open-ended questions.
Right. Thank you so much for getting into the details of what is exactly happening at the border. Now, Mr. Saikia had actually mentioned about what possibly went wrong in Nagaland. And I come to you, Mr. Pillai, with this question. Mr. R.N. Ravi was hastily removed from his governorship from Nagaland, and also his role as an interlocutor for the talks with NSCIM was ended. What according to you, went wrong?
I think there were 3 or 4 factors. One, the 2015 framework agreement, which was just a basic good intention statement, was hyped up too much.
Right.
The second was, I think, R.N. Ravi being made the governor of Nagaland and continuing to be an interlocutor. If he was made governor of Nagaland, they should have had another interlocutor, because the governor is a constitutional position looking after one state, and interlocutor's position is different. You can't combine both those. I think that was a mistake in appointing him as a governor. If you want, you could have had him as a governor, but then somebody else should have been the interlocutor.
Right.
And I think the third issue, which actually the development took place, was actually in August 2019, when the government abrogated Article 370 and took over the reins of Kashmir, and state was bifurcated into 2. I think the NSCNIM got a clear signal that any constitutional guarantee that can be given by the government has no meaning or validity, because it can be taken away without any issue if there's a government which has a majority in parliament. So to that extent, I think that also led to a little bit of credibility in terms of the assurances. And that is why today they know that having got rid of, by the government, having got rid of the constitution of Jammu and Kashmir through parliament, they know that whatever constitutional safeguards were being provided for in the agreement with the NSCNIM really didn't have much value, because it could be removed the next day by another government, and there would be no lasting availability of that. So I think these three issues really brought the situation where I think both sides raised the ante, and to try and find a quick solution in terms of saying that there's a great amount of people's pressure to try and find a quick solution, and you can't find people in Nagaland, and the government has to discuss not only with the people of Nagaland but also the people of Manipur and the government there to try and find a solution. I think this really was what went wrong with the Naga dialogue. I'm glad that they've appointed a new interlocutor, and possibly he'll need to build confidence, and it will take some time.
Do you have a timeline in mind as to when this could actually be, when Nagaland can finally achieve peace?
At the moment, I'm not very optimistic. I think it's going to take time. I'm looking at it easily between a 3 to 5 year period before one can hope to see a solution there.
And also, it would be only understandable why some of these insurgent groups actually feel that way. But talking in terms of the distinction between the security environments in, say, Kashmir as opposed to the Northeast, in particular Nagaland, is definitely different, right?
Yes, it's definitely distinct. I think you don't have that much of a militarization as has happened in Kashmir. By and large, it is peaceful. You might have extortion, you might have criminal activities which can be handled by local police and others. You don't have this cross-border terrorism which is really coming in from Pakistan supported elements. That is not there in the Northeast. It is still whatever insurgent groups are there are all local. And therefore, the situation in the Northeast is far more peaceful, and has been peaceful for quite some time. I think if my own feeling is that it's not going to, at the moment at least, there is no popular support for any resistance movement or insurgent movement throughout the Northeast, even in Nagaland. And therefore, any insurgent group that tries to, shall I say, take to the path of violence again, will find it very difficult to get popular support.
Right. But how do we deal with our neighborhoods? I mean, regardless of which government is in power at the state and the center, we have to face a very difficult neighborhood, whether it's Myanmar or Bangladesh. And somehow, whether in conceptualizing and executing infrastructure projects or in terms of stability and security for the Northeast, it is very, very detrimental when relations with our neighbors deteriorate. And somehow, regardless of whether the BJP or the Congress is in power, somehow we've not been able to achieve the kind of a status quo we've been looking at, right?
Yeah, I think, see, to an extent, I think there's a limited aspect in terms of the cross-border we should worry about. I think we should worry more about making sure that our internal problems are solved internally.
Right.
And if you solve your internal problems by yourself, make the local people happy with what happening on the ground. They see justice happening, they see development happening, there's jobs and so on. I think 90% of the problem will be over.
Right. And do you see a positive change in the last few years, regardless of who it was, whether the UPA or the NDA? There has been an increase in development. Would you say that?
Oh, yes. Last 20 years, definitely. And if you see see the statistics of violence between, say, 97 and 2021. It's a steady decline. I mean, you will have these isolated incidents which will keep happening on and off because there are people, there are disgruntled elements, and they have weapons. So it will happen. But I think by and large, the people of the Northeast have, there's no popular support for an insurgent movement, provided we don't create that, you must allow good, as I said, good governance is very important. Redressal of grievances must take place immediately. And so long as you don't have, police atrocities or, security forces atrocities and so on, I think you don't have to worry. I think the people of the Northeast have almost given up violence unless we force them to take it up again.
Right. If there are trigger points again. Right. Yeah. Thank you so much. Mr. Saikia, you've also been recently writing and saying that, there is a new wave of radicalization that may come up in the Northeast. Why do you say so, sir?
Well, this is because of the atmospheric. You see, we've been actually facing a spate of radicalization, particularly in the lower Assam districts for quite some time now. You recall that in 2014, number of Jamaatul Mujahideen Bangladesh cadres were arrested from Barpata district of Assam. And I've had the good fortune of actually questioning a few of them, including Sahanur Alam. These people have very active track or linkages with the Bangladesh Tanzims, who also have links with the global Salafi movement, players like the Islamic State and the Al-Qaeda. Right. You see, there have been waves of radicalization. The first wave actually happened between 1999 and 2005, and we've seen that manifestation of that in 9/11, etc. The second one actually, to my mind, actually took place when the neo-caliphate came into being under the leadership of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in Iraq. And that is the time when the Islamic State came into being, and the taking of the bay'ah or the oath of allegiance. Now, with the territorial ouster of the Islamic State from these two nations, I think the game has actually changed for the worse for the peace-loving world, really, because they're everywhere. They've entered Afghanistan in a different avatar, as it were, and have entered India as well. The Islamic State, for instance, called themselves the Wali-i-Hind, or the guardians of Hindustan, and so has Al-Qaeda. You just have to look at the Al-Jawahiri's speech, where he has actually named Assam. Now, as far as I'm concerned, as a student of security, half the battle was won when the emir of a group like Al-Qaeda actually names a small state like Assam in his worldwide televised speech. Right. Talking about the radicalization which is going to happen now, which I call the third wave of radicalization, and I've been speaking and talking about it in the recent months, is that with the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan and the events which we have just witnessed in Bangladesh, which again are a result of the butterfly effect of what's happened in Afghanistan. You see, I think there will be a speeding up or an expedition of the wave of radicalization, which I call the third wave of radicalization. Recently, the Chief Minister of Assam has made a statement, and it came out in the headline of the Assam Tribune. It's open source, so I'm quoting from that hundreds of youths have disappeared from Assam. And the headline was again saying there is a radicalization effort on in the state. Now, that sort of, puts me on the same page as what the intelligence agencies are talking about. You see, there was already a radicalization effort on because of the various factors that are in play globally and locally. And as I've said, after the ouster of the Islamic State from Iraq and Syria, things have actually gotten worse. They have actually entered this particular region, which is the Indian subcontinent. And the Taliban takeover is one of the manifestation, because soon we will see eastward surge of, I don't want to use the word jihad, but it is actually going to be eastward surge of the jihadi, really. And combined with developments in Bangladesh, and I've already told you about the fact that there are two Bangladesh in reality, we will see a pincer movement from both these sides. And somewhere in the lower Assam districts, the pincers would sort of, come together, and the radicalization efforts would actually find a manifestation. And this would actually see or manifest itself in very violent movements, mass protest against anything which is considered un-Islamic, as is the case which you have seen with groups like Hifazat-e-Andalan in Bangladesh, overgrown groups which are talking about, repeal of blasphemy laws, or enactment of blasphemy laws, repeal of un-Islamic laws like enactment of statues of Sheikh Mujib, etc. And there would be an aping exercise of that in the lower Assam districts primarily, initially, because we abut them so closely. So I'm a little worried about these aspects. You see, after the 2016 forces-taking exercise in Bangladesh, there was a spurt of suicide bombings, even by women cadres of JMB, or what is now known as the newer JMB. But because we abut them so closely, and we have had spillover effects onto Assam from Bangladesh because of the pressure which they are facing, they faced with there, it is possible that the radicals among the minority community in India and in Assam might sort of be influenced by, or informed by what are the Islamist agenda across the borders as well. And that is something. And if I may say, by way of few recommendations, if you will allow me, I think the first thing which we do is to immediately psychologically segregate the population which these radical elements are trying to target. And there is nothing called de-radicalization. We are still sort of groping around in India with an animal called de-radicalization when there isn't any such animal really. What we need to do is counter-radicalize, immediately psychologically segregate them, A. B, use the minority population. We in Assam, and thankfully the leadership of the Assam police is very, very I think well up on this aspect, use the leaders of the minority community to attack these things, and they have been done. They have used important leaders, important names like Nahin Afrin, etc., who are attacking the Islamic State's ingress into the state. And thirdly, I think there has to be a element of kinetic, if I may say, action as well. You have to somehow neutralize the second rung of leadership of these tanzeems or these radical elements, because they constitute a very important conduit between the populace and the leadership. Once that is done, I think at least you will have some breathing space for the radicalization effort to be sort of, curbed to a great extent. I don't think it'll ever stop, because I think this is a relentless war that the people are waging, and Nizam and Mustafa is really their final objective. I think that will go on forever. But the government of India, the government of Assam, particularly the Assam police, are doing a great job as far as this is concerned. And I think they need to sort of be lauded as far as, and supported by New Delhi in their efforts.
Right. Thank you so much for that elaborate answer. In fact, Dr. Ankita Dutta was mentioning about how the eviction drives have been going on in places like Gurukuti in Assam, and the Chief Minister has been personally overseeing many of these. But my question again to you, Mr. Saikia, is that, and we'll conclude with this probably after a message from Mr. Pillai later on. How do you maintain the security situation and to also continue the de-radicalization efforts in the Northeast? Because for Kashmir, there's a particular policy. We've seen de-radicalization efforts take place in northern Kerala, where recruitments to the Islamic State had been happening in big numbers. But as far as the Northeast is concerned, I think the Islamic radicalization has not been really addressed in a very effective policy manner, whether it's at a central level or at the state level. And also keeping in mind with policies like the CA and RC being implemented, there's a lot of communal tension as well coming into place. So what I mean to say is there are so many complexities associated with the Northeast while dealing with this issue. So what do you think the government of India should bear in mind, and what exactly do you think we need to do in order to get rid of this menace in the Northeast?
Well, like I said in my last answer, I think there are very clear-cut three methodologies which can be immediately adopted. First of all, I think you need to sort of incorporate the minority population in the Northeast in the government's war against terror, which is Islamist terror. In this scheme of things. And secondly, I think you should segregate them psychologically from the ill effects of what some among many in the radical world are trying to sort of influence. So that is important. So I think a psychological initiative has been already taken by the Assam police and the Assam government that needs to be supported by the government of India in a big way. And third, once you have identified these radical elements, for instance, let me give you a straightforward example. The Popular Front of India, which is a Kerala-based organization, has made its ingress into Assam in a big way.
Right.
Now they have 3 zones, north of the Brahmaputra, south of the Brahmaputra, and one in the Barak Valley. In 2016, the strength was 8,000, and you can imagine what the strength would be now. What I'm trying to say is that these people are already radicalized elements. So that is why I used the word that you need to have kinetic action against some of these radical elements, because otherwise they're already in the demographic jungles of Lower Assam, and slowly they're moving towards Upper Assam. And as you know, the percentage of the minority population in Assam is already reaching the 40% mark, which is a huge number. So they have both the electoral strength and the demographic strength slowly. I think it's important for us to sort of, make a comprehensive, holistic game plan to support the sort of the menacing moves of the radicalized the elements.
Right. Thank you so much for that. Before we conclude, I'd like to ask Dr. Dutta one last question. What do you think our vulnerabilities are as far as, I mean, because you've been studying Manipur for a very long time, not just in terms of the socio-cultural aspects, but also the security aspects of Manipur. What do you think our current vulnerabilities are as far as the border situation with Myanmar is concerned?
Yeah, I think good question. The Zomi Revolutionary Army, I would like to briefly talk about that, which is an insurgent group with a presence in Manipur and Myanmar, because we cannot leave this organization when we are talking about border security of Manipur and Myanmar, because the cadres of the Zomi Revolutionary Army, they are a crucial link in the transnational rhino horn smuggling racket that extends to several countries of Southeast Asia and China via Myanmar. And Assam's Daldali Forest Reserve in Karbi Anglong district, which is situated in the neighborhood of the Kaziranga National Park. And this district, Karbi Anglong, it shares a border with Nagaland, and the region bordering Myanmar in Nagaland is quite well known for providing refuge to armed insurgents and poachers. So it is noteworthy of mentioning here that camps of poachers have been busted from several places in Karbi Anglong district during police raids at various times in the past few years as well. And the leaders and financiers of these rhino poaching cartels, they are generally based somewhere along the borders of Manipur's Churachandpur district with Myanmar. They engage the youth of these areas as small-time drug peddlers who look for earning some extra money, but in due course of time, they themselves fall prey to drug addiction. This particular insurgent group, Zomi Revolutionary Army, it was formed in 1997 following an increase in inter and intra-community rivalries in Churachandpur. And it is one of the many armed groups in Manipur that is also a part of the UPF. UPF is the United People's Front, a larger umbrella group of insurgents which have suspended operations during a dialogue with the central government. And At present, the Zomi outfit is one of the largest in the area, boasting of several thousands of cadres. It either it orders the poaching of rhinos for their horns or buys the rhino horns from other poachers. And it operates mostly from Churachandpur and to some extent across the border with Myanmar via Nagaland. This insurgent group, the Zomi Revolutionary Army, it acts as an important intermediary between Manipur and Myanmar before the horns and other wildlife parts are further smuggled to China. And the Indo-Myanmar border town of Moreh was until recently, it was a safe haven for smugglers. In fact, in 2018, an incident happened when a Manipur police constable was caught carrying rhino horns in Senapati district. Further investigations had revealed that the horns were headed to Moreh. But under India's Act East policy, the India-Myanmar-Thailand trilateral highway that leads to Moreh, and it has multiple checkpoints, which has made smuggling increasingly difficult. And it is in this context that the location of Churachandpur, actually, it offers a strategic opportunity in terms of an easy route to Myanmar compared to the other border districts of Myanmar like Chandel. And significantly, the road from Churachandpur town to Behyang village, where the recent ambush took place, it falls under the area of influence of the Zomi Revolutionary Army, which has well-established links and networks with wildlife crime syndicates in Nagaland, Arunachal Pradesh, and Myanmar, and which are leveraged by this insurgent group to make money by selling the rhino horns and various other sorts of illegal activities. And Behyang, where this ambush occurred on November 13, it is among the 3 listed drug trafficking routes as well. More precisely, heroin smuggling, through which the contraband articles are brought from Myanmar into Manipur for onward supply into the rest of India and outside. When we talk about this cross-border business, of course, it is very lucrative, and it has been happening with the connivance of many insurgent outfits operating in the area. Behyang, it is a mountainous border village which is barely 10 kilometers from the strategically sensitive border that Manipur shares with Myanmar. The people of Behyang, they had actively participated in the struggle for freedom against the British colonial rule. It was in December 2017 that the current Chief Minister of Manipur, Biren Singh, he had declared Behyang village as the gateway for a new route for trade with Myanmar. The hilly terrain of Churachandpur in Manipur, it is surrounded by thick and dense jungles along the village of Sehken near the border with Myanmar. And they have always been known to provide a safe haven for militants. In fact, there are several vulnerable portions of the India-Myanmar border in Manipur that have been facilitating the entry of insurgents and other anti-national elements into the state time and again. And as Pillai sir had already said about the lack of governance in these areas, which is obviously a critical factor in fomenting insurgency in the area.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Datta, for giving that comprehensive picture of what's happening in Manipur and the Myanmar border. Before we conclude, may I humbly request Mr. Pillai to give his concluding remarks, because Mr. Pillai, thousands of people watch our shows every day, particularly the panel discussions that I've been hosting for the last couple of months. And that includes a lot of bureaucrats and policymakers. So as far as what we are discussing today, would you have a message for all of them?
Yeah, I think I keep saying, and this is one aspect which doesn't figure in any of the, everybody talks of, economic development, they'll talk about many other issues. But the real critical aspect for the Northeast, and which there's a real deficiency, is actually the lack of good governance. You need governance both at the state level as well as at the local level, at the panchayat level. And none of these governments have actually performed well on that aspect. And that is one of the reasons why the people themselves have very little faith in the government, except at the time of elections, when they elect them, and many of them pay a large sum of money, as you are all aware, to get elected. And that is the people's, they recover that much money from these politicians when they get elected, and then they forget about them for the next 5 years. They don't expect anything more from them.
Right. Well, how do we strengthen the local governments over there?
Well, you have to see, the problem is you have to first, the local panchayat acts are weak. And
Okay.
second, they don't devolve funds. The funds are also held by the state government. In a state like Kerala and so on, 30 to 40% of the total budget is given in lump sum grant to the panchayats. And then the panchayats decide what they want to do. And therefore, each panchayat gets, they get 1 crore, they get 2 crores of rupees that they can then use for, water supply, electricity, street lighting or whatever it is to primary schools and so on. So all that is in the charge. Primary schools, primary health centers, etc., are under the control of the panchayats in a state like Kerala and in many other states also. So you really need to devolve powers to the local bodies so that the local people feel that they have a stake in governance. There's money, there's responsibility, and at the grassroots level, people are much more, they are accountable to the people much more than somebody sitting in the state capital. Because many cases you've seen in the governments there are very highly fractured ethnically. So they will say that the government at the state level is comprised of one community and we are neglected and so on. That can be countered by making sure that 30 to 40% of the state budget is devolved as a lump sum grant to the local bodies.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I thank all of you for joining us today. It's been a very, very informative session. And in fact, I love talking about the Northeast because this was also one of my areas of interest during my master's, which got concluded very recently. So I'm always happy to discuss about the affairs in Northeast. And thank you so much, Mr. Pillai, Mr. Saikia, and Dr. Datta for joining us today. And I hope it was a good panel discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And to all our viewers, please do like, share, and subscribe to Citti Media. We'll be coming out with more such panel discussions in the future. Until then, this is your host, Sharan Citti, signing off.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.